Before we begin, take a deep breath and settle in. What you're about to hear are stories of real people, real mysteries, and moments that still have no answers. Here on ChapmanCrime, we explore the strange, the tragic, and the unexplained. From haunting disappearances and unsolved murders to stories that seem to defy logic. Each case you'll hear tonight is told with respect to the victims and their families. Some of these stories will stay with you long after the video ends, not because they're frightening, but because they remind us how fragile the truth can be. If you enjoy exploring mysteries that still echo through time, you're in the right place. This is ChapmanCrime, where every story hides a secret. The disappearance of Sneha Philip. On the evening of September 10, 2001, Dr. Sneha Ann Philip, a 31-year-old physician living in New York City, went shopping near the World Trade Center. Security footage captured her buying clothes and household items. She seemed calm, preparing for an ordinary day ahead. It was the last confirmed sighting of her. The next morning, the world changed forever. Sneha and her husband, Ron, lived in a Battery Park apartment just blocks from the Twin Towers. On September 11th, when Ron returned home after the attacks, their building was covered in dust and chaos, but Sneha was gone. Her belongings, including her purse and ID, were still in the apartment. Only the clothes from her shopping trip were missing. It appeared she had left that morning wearing them. For years, her fate was uncertain. Some believed she may have been caught in the collapse of the towers while trying to help victims. She was a doctor, and her family insisted she would have rushed to aid the injured. Others pointed to difficulties in her personal life. Sneha had recently faced professional and personal stress, and her career was at a crossroads. Investigators considered whether she had chosen to leave her life behind. But there was no evidence of such a plan. Her family never stopped searching for answers. They described Sneha as vibrant, compassionate, and strong-willed. The idea that she had simply walked away from her loved ones felt impossible to them. Instead, they believed she acted selflessly on the morning of the attacks, rushing to where help was needed most. If true, her story would be one of quiet heroism lost in the chaos of that day. Legal battles followed. Initially, officials hesitated to list her among the victims of 9/11 because her presence at the towers could not be proven. Years later, after appeals, she was officially recognized as one of the lives lost. Yet even that left questions. No remains were ever identified, no direct evidence placed her inside the buildings. Her disappearance straddles the line between personal tragedy and global catastrophe. The mystery of Sneha Philip endures because it exists in two worlds: the intimate story of a young woman's final night, and the broader shadow of history's most devastating terror attack. Did she walk toward the towers to help, her fate sealed by bravery? Or did something else happen in those final hours before the morning of September 11? The truth remains uncertain, but her name is remembered among the thousands who never came home that day. On the night of April 1, 2006, 27-year-old medical student Brian Schaffer walked into a Columbus, Ohio bar and was never seen again. What makes his disappearance so haunting is that security footage shows him entering the bar, but not a single frame of him ever leaving. Brian was a second-year student at Ohio State University's College of Medicine. He was bright, ambitious, and known for his easygoing personality. Friends said he had a quiet charm, a love for music, and dreams of one day starting a band. But his life had recently taken a tragic turn. Just weeks earlier, his mother had passed away from cancer. Those close to him said he was grieving but trying to stay strong. On March 31st, the night before spring break, Brian went out with friends to unwind. They began the evening with dinner and drinks, then ended up at a popular bar called the Ugly Tuna Saloona, a lively spot in the South Campus Gateway. Surveillance cameras captured Brian entering the bar around 1:15 a.m. with two friends. They drank, laughed, and mingled. Around 1:55 a.m., Brian was seen on camera talking to two women near the escalator, smiling, relaxed, before turning back toward the bar's entrance. That's the last time he was ever seen. When the bar closed, his friends assumed Brian had left ahead of them. They tried calling him, but his phone went straight to voicemail. The next morning, he didn't show up for a planned trip to Miami with his girlfriend. Days passed, and there was still no word. Police reviewed every second of the security footage from that night. The cameras covered all exits. Yet Brian never appeared leaving. The only other way out was through a service door used by staff, leading to a construction site. Investigators searched every inch of the building, nearby dumpsters and even the sewer system. There was no sign of him. It was as if he had simply vanished inside the bar. Theories soon followed. Some believed Brian may have suffered an accident at the construction site and been unintentionally hidden in debris. Others speculated he staged his own disappearance to start a new life after his mother's death. But nothing supported either idea. His credit cards, bank account, and phone remained untouched. His friends and family never stopped searching, and his girlfriend continued to call his number for months, sometimes hearing it ring before going to voicemail. Years later, the mystery remains unsolved. The bar has since closed and the area has changed, but Brian's disappearance still lingers like a ghost over Columbus. How does a man walk into a bar in full view of cameras and never walk out? Nearly 2 decades later, no evidence, no sightings, and no answers have surfaced. Just one impossible question that continues to echo in the minds of all who have followed the case. Where did Brian Schaffer go that night? And how can someone vanish into thin air in a crowded city? On a quiet winter night in Tokyo, the Miyazawa family's home stood at the edge of Setagaya, a peaceful suburb near a small park. It was December 30th, 2000, the final night of the millennium. Inside, 44-year-old Mikio Miyazawa, his wife Yasuko, and their 2 children, Nina and Rei, settled in for the evening. Outside, the streets were still, the air sharp and cold. By morning, the family would be gone, victims of one of Japan's most chilling unsolved crimes. The following day, relatives who couldn't reach the family went to check on them. What they found stunned Japan. The entire Miyazawa family had been murdered sometime during the night. But what truly disturbed investigators wasn't just the violence. It was the bizarre behavior of the killer afterward. Evidence suggested that someone had broken into the house through a bathroom window, connected to the park behind the property. Yet after the attack, instead of fleeing, the intruder stayed for hours. He ate ice cream from the fridge, used the family's computer, and even took naps on the sofa. He changed clothes, used the bathroom, and left behind countless fingerprints and DNA samples. It was as though he felt completely unafraid of being caught. Police recovered a treasure trove of forensic evidence: blood, hair, and clothing, all belonging to the killer. His DNA revealed he was of mixed Asian and European ancestry, likely from South Korea or Southern Europe. The clothes he left behind were traced to a specific brand sold in limited numbers. Even his sand-colored backpack and hat could be tracked to stores in Japan. Despite this mountain of evidence, the man has never been identified. Detectives interviewed thousands of people and analyzed every clue, but no match was ever found. It's believed the killer may have been injured during the attack. His blood was found mixed with the victims. Some investigators theorized he might have been a transient or military-connected individual who fled Japan shortly after the crime. Others believe he could still live somewhere in the city, hiding in plain sight. The Miyazawa home was left untouched for years after the murders, sealed as a crime scene. It stood silently at the edge of the park, a grim reminder of what had happened. In time, the neighborhood changed. Playgrounds and new homes appeared, but the house remained frozen in that terrible night. Decades later, the Setagaya family murders remain one of Japan's most confounding cases. Despite DNA, fingerprints, and the killer's every move documented, his name is still unknown. The case stands as a chilling paradox, a mystery overflowing with evidence but starved of answers. A family lost, a nation haunted, and a question that still echoes through the quiet streets of Setagaya. Who was the man who didn't need to run? On a cold February evening in 2004, 21-year-old nursing student Maura Murray vanished on a lonely stretch of Highway 112 in Haverhill, New Hampshire. Her car was found crashed into a snowbank. The headlights were still on, the engine still warm. Inside were her belongings, neatly packed, as though she had planned a trip. But Maura herself was gone. Maura was bright, athletic, and ambitious. She studied nursing at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, worked part-time, and was close to her family. But in the days leading up to her disappearance, something seemed to weigh heavily on her. She had a small accident in her father's car, borrowed money from him, and sent an email to professors saying she'd be gone for a week due to a family emergency. There was no such emergency. On February 9th, she packed her car with clothes, textbooks, and snacks, then began driving north. She didn't tell anyone where she was going. That evening at around 7:30 p.m., residents along Route 112 heard a crash. When they looked outside, they saw a black Saturn sedan lodged in a snowbank. One man stopped to check on her. Maura appeared unhurt but shaken. She told him she'd called for help, though phone records later showed no call had been made. Minutes later, a school bus driver offered assistance. She declined, insisting she was fine. When police arrived just minutes after that encounter, Maura had vanished. Her car was locked, the airbags deployed, and her personal items still inside. There were no footprints leading away in the snow and no sign of a struggle. She had simply disappeared into the freezing night. Search teams combed the woods, rivers, and back roads for days. Bloodhounds followed her scent briefly up the road, then lost it. No trace of Maura has ever been found. Not a piece of clothing, not a single confirmed sighting. The mystery deepened when her internet searches revealed directions to mountain areas in Vermont and New Hampshire. Some believe she planned to start a new life, escaping personal stress. Others suspect she accepted a ride from someone she trusted, or someone who offered help and meant harm. There's even speculation she succumbed to the harsh elements that night and her body was never found. Yet none of these theories fully explain why she left in the first place. Over the years, Maura's disappearance became one of the most analyzed cold cases online. Forums, podcasts, and documentaries have dissected every detail, every map, every sighting, every possible motive. But all paths lead back to the same lonely stretch of road, where her car sat idling in the cold. 2 decades later, the questions remain. Why did Maura leave school so suddenly? Where was she going? And what happened to her after that crash? Her story endures because it sits at the crossroads of logic and mystery. A young woman driving into the unknown, vanishing between one heartbeat and the next, leaving behind a trail of silence that has never been broken. In the early hours of March 8, 2014, Malaysia Airlines flight MH370 vanished from the night sky. The Boeing 777 took off from Kuala Lumpur bound for Beijing with 239 people on board, 227 passengers and 12 crew. It was a routine overnight flight, calm weather and clear air, but less than an hour later communication was lost and the plane disappeared without a trace. At 1:19 a.m., the flight's final words were transmitted to air traffic control. "Good night, Malaysian 370. Moments later, the aircraft's transponder stopped sending signals. Civilian radar lost contact as the plane crossed the South China Sea. Yet military radar later revealed something strange. The aircraft had turned sharply west, crossing back over Malaysia and out into the vast Indian Ocean. No distress call was ever made. No emergency code, no sign of hijacking or mechanical failure. The aircraft simply flew on, silently, for more than 6 hours before vanishing from radar entirely. When MH370 failed to arrive in Beijing, it sparked one of the largest search operations in history, covering nearly 120,000 square kilometers of ocean. But for years, no wreckage was found. It wasn't until 2015 that a piece of the plane, a flaperon from the wing, washed ashore on Reunion Island, thousands of miles away from where the plane had been expected to crash. More fragments followed, scattered across the coasts of Africa and the Indian Ocean islands. These confirmed that MH370 had ended somewhere deep in the southern Indian Ocean, yet how and why it went so far off course remains unknown. Investigators examined every theory imaginable: mechanical failure, fire, hijacking, or deliberate human action. The plane's communication system had been manually disabled, suggesting someone on board knew what they were doing. But no motive was ever proven. The pilot, Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah, was experienced and respected, though rumors emerged about possible personal troubles or political motives. Still, evidence was circumstantial at best. Families of the passengers waited for years, clinging to hope, watching as search ships and sonar drones scoured the seafloor. By 2018, after spending more than $150 million, the official search was suspended, without answers. To this day, only a handful of debris pieces have been confirmed, the rest of the plane and its passengers lost somewhere in the deep. Flight MH370 remains one of the greatest mysteries in aviation history. A modern jet equipped with tracking and safety systems simply vanished. The ocean still guards its secrets, holding within its depths the truth of what happened on that quiet March night when 239 souls disappeared into the endless blue. In August 2013, 19-year-old college student Bryce Laspisa left Sierra College near Sacramento to return home to his parents in Laguna Niguel, California. It should have been a simple 7-hour drive. But over the next 2 days, Bryce's journey took a strange and unsettling turn, one that ended with his car overturned beside a lake and Bryce nowhere to be found. Bryce was known as friendly, artistic, and full of energy. But in the weeks before his disappearance, his behavior began to change. Friends said he was drinking heavily, sleeping little, and acting distant. The night before he vanished, he broke up with his girlfriend suddenly, saying she'd be better off without him. Concerned, she called his parents, who spoke to Bryce and thought he sounded tired but fine. They had no idea it would be the last time they'd ever hear his voice. On August 29th, Bryce started driving south, but instead of heading straight home, he stopped repeatedly, first in Buttonwillow, where he sat parked for hours. A local man checked on him twice at his parents' request. Each time, Bryce said he was fine and just needed to clear his head. When his parents urged him to continue home, he promised he would. In the early hours of August 30th, highway cameras captured Bryce's car heading toward Castaic Lake just north of Los Angeles. That morning, his vehicle was found overturned on a dirt access road near the lake's edge. Inside were his phone, wallet, and laptop, but Bryce was gone. The back window had been kicked out from the inside, suggesting he had escaped after the crash. There was no blood and no signs of injury nearby. Footprints led toward the lake but stopped suddenly. Search teams scoured the lake, surrounding hills, and nearby highways for days. Divers combed the water. Dogs traced his scent to a nearby truck stop before losing the trail. Every lead ended in silence. Some believed Bryce may have suffered a mental health crisis and wandered away. Others suspected he planned to disappear intentionally. But his family, who described him as deeply loved and close to them, have never believed he would simply walk away. Years later, Bryce's disappearance remains unsolved. No evidence of foul play, no confirmed sightings, and no remains have ever been found. His parents still keep the same phone number, hoping one day it might ring with news. What happened on that long, lonely highway remains one of California's most haunting mysteries. A young man who seemed to vanish between one heartbeat and the next, leaving behind only a wrecked car and the question of where the road truly led him. In late August 2016, police in Australia began a search unlike any they had seen before. The Tromp family, Mark and Jacoba, and their 3 adult children, Rihanna, Mitchell, and Ella, had suddenly abandoned their home in Sylvan, Victoria, and vanished on a strange cross-country road trip that would leave investigators and psychologists baffled. It began on August 29th. Without warning, the family packed their car and fled, leaving behind passports, credit cards, and phones. They told no one where they were going. When their neighbors checked the house later, they found doors unlocked and piles of belongings scattered across the floor, as if the family had left in a panic. Only one clue remained, a half-written note suggesting they believed they were being followed. The Tromps drove more than 1,600 kilometers north through New South Wales. Somewhere along the way, Mitchell, the eldest son, grew uneasy and decided to turn back. When he arrived home, he told police that his parents had been behaving strangely, paranoid, fearful, and convinced someone was coming to harm them. He couldn't explain why. The remaining 4 continued their journey, but things quickly unraveled. In Bathurst, Ella left the group and stole a car to return home, later charged by police. Rihanna and her parents pressed on, eventually stopping near Goulburn. Rihanna fled into the countryside, terrified and disoriented, later found on the side of a road trying to flag down help. She had no idea where her parents were. Meanwhile, Mark and Jacoba vanished into the rural hills. For days, helicopters and ground teams searched vast farmland and forests. Mark was eventually found wandering near Wangaratta, confused but physically fine. Jacoba was discovered soon after near a small town, exhausted and distressed. All 5 family members were alive, but none could clearly explain what had happened. Police ruled out foul play. Doctors later described the event as a shared psychotic episode, or folie à famille, in which one person's delusion spreads through close relatives under intense stress. The Tromps had been hardworking berry farmers, stable, private, and by all accounts ordinary. Yet something triggered a collective fear strong enough to send them fleeing into the wild without reason. Even after the family returned home, the details of those strange days remained hazy. None of the Tromps faced charges, and all have since withdrawn from public view. What began as a family road trip turned into a psychological mystery, a story of fear, confusion, and the fragile boundary between reason and panic. To this day, the Tromp family mystery stands as one of Australia's most haunting modern enigmas. A quiet family that suddenly ran from an unseen threat, only to find themselves lost in their own minds. On the night of May 14, 2008, 19-year-old Brandon Swanson was driving home to Marshall, Minnesota, after celebrating the end of his college semester with friends. Around midnight, he missed a turn on a dark rural road and called his parents to say his car had slid into a ditch. He wasn't hurt, just frustrated and needed a ride home. It should have been a simple rescue, but instead it became one of the strangest disappearances in recent history. Brandon told his parents he could see lights from a nearby town and would start walking toward them while they came to find him. His father, Brian, stayed on the phone as they tried to pinpoint his location. For nearly 47 minutes, Brandon described his surroundings: gravel roads, fields, and fences, but nothing matched what his parents saw when they drove through the area. The two kept missing each other, as if they were in different versions of the same countryside. At one point, Brandon mentioned crossing a couple of fences and hearing running water nearby. Then, without warning, his calm voice shifted. He said, "Oh shit," and the call went silent. His father kept the line open, thinking the phone had lost signal, but Brandon never spoke again. When police searched the area, they found his car exactly where he had said, stuck on a small dirt road outside the town of Taunton. But it wasn't near any of the landmarks he'd described. It was miles away from where he seemed to believe he was. Search dogs followed his scent down gravel paths through fields and toward a riverbank before the trail abruptly ended. No footprints, clothing, or belongings were found. Over the years, the case has drawn countless theories. Some believe Brandon accidentally fell into the river that night, though extensive searches have never recovered a trace of him. Others think he became disoriented, wandered too far, or even encountered someone in the dark. Yet nothing in the evidence points clearly in any direction. What makes the disappearance of Brandon Swanson so haunting is how real-time it felt. His parents listening helplessly on the other end of the phone, his voice fading into the night. Every spring, volunteers still walk the back roads where Brandon was last heard, hoping for even the smallest clue. To this day, no one knows where Brandon went after that final moment. A single phone call, a quiet Minnesota road, and a voice that simply vanished into the dark have left behind one of the most chilling mysteries of the 21st century. On a cold November night in 2012, 26-year-old Emma Philippoff vanished from downtown Victoria, British Columbia. She was last seen barefoot, holding her shoes, standing outside the Empress Hotel. A police officer who spoke with her said she seemed confused but not in danger. Minutes later, she walked away into the dark, and no one has seen her since. Emma was creative and free-spirited, an artist, poet, and nature lover who had recently moved to Victoria for a simpler life by the ocean. She spent time writing, taking photos, and working part-time in a cafe. Friends described her as kind but deeply introspective. In the weeks before she disappeared, something seemed to weigh on her. She had moved between hostels, staying occasionally at a women's shelter, telling staff she felt unsafe, though she couldn't explain why. On the evening of November 28th, Emma called her mother, Shelley, asking her to come from Ontario to visit. Worried, Shelley booked a flight and arrived the next day, but by the time she reached Victoria, Emma was gone. That same night, witnesses saw Emma pacing near the Empress Hotel, appearing distressed. A police officer stopped to check on her after someone called in concern. She told him she was fine and didn't need help. That was the last confirmed sighting. The next morning, her van was found in a parking lot nearby. Inside were her clothes, camping gear, poems, and photographs. Her passport, laptop, and wallet were still there. It looked as though she had planned to return. Searches of nearby woods, beaches, and trails found nothing. Over the years, theories have varied. Some believe Emma suffered a sudden mental health crisis and fled the area voluntarily. Others suspect she encountered someone that night who offered false comfort. Witnesses later came forward saying they may have seen her in the days following her disappearance, but none of those sightings were ever confirmed. Her family has continued to search tirelessly, launching campaigns, interviews, and billboards across Canada. Emma's journals and poems revealed a deep sensitivity to life's beauty and sorrow. She often wrote about nature, loneliness, and finding peace in simplicity. Her story has since touched thousands. not only because of the mystery itself, but because of the person she was, an artist whose disappearance still feels like a poem left unfinished. More than a decade later, the question remains, what happened to Emma Filipoff that cold November night? A young woman, barefoot and searching for calm, stepped into the dark and vanished, leaving behind only her words, her photographs, and a mystery that continues to echo along the quiet streets of Victoria. On November 24, 1971, the eve of Thanksgiving, a man in a dark suit and raincoat boarded Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305 from Portland to Seattle. He gave his name as Dan Cooper, later misreported as D.B. Cooper. He was quiet, polite, and unremarkable. But over the next few hours, he would pull off one of the most daring and mysterious crimes in aviation history and vanish forever. Cooper ordered a bourbon and soda, lit a cigarette, and handed a flight attendant a folded note. Thinking it was a phone number, she slipped it into her pocket. Cooper leaned toward her and whispered, "Miss, you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb." Inside was a handwritten message claiming he had explosives in his briefcase. When she looked down, she saw red sticks, wires, and a battery. He calmly told her to sit beside him and dictated his demands. $200,000 in cash, 4 parachutes, and a fuel truck standing by in Seattle. The plane landed just after 5:30 p.m. The passengers were told there was a minor mechanical issue. None knew what was unfolding. Cooper exchanged the hostages for the money and parachutes, keeping the crew aboard. He then ordered the pilots to fly toward Mexico City at a low altitude and slow speed. Somewhere over the forests of southwest Washington, in the middle of a storm, Cooper opened the rear stairs of the Boeing 727, stepped into the cold night air, and jumped. When the plane landed in Reno hours later, the rear door was open and Cooper was gone. Searchers scoured the wilderness below, expecting to find his parachute or remains. Nothing was found, no trace of him, his gear, or the money. It was as if the man had vanished into the sky. Nearly a decade later, in 1980, a young boy camping along the Columbia River discovered a decaying package of $20 bills buried in the sand, $5,800 in total. The serial numbers matched Cooper's ransom money, reigniting the mystery. How the cash ended up there and whether Cooper survived the jump remain unsolved. Over the years, dozens of suspects have been investigated. Ex-soldiers, criminals, and even airline employees. None have been proven to be D.B. Cooper. Theories range from a perfect escape to a fatal landing in the dense forest. Some believe he lived quietly under a new identity. Others think he never made it to the ground alive. The FBI officially closed the case in 2016 after 45 years, calling it one of the longest and most exhaustive investigations in history. But the name D.B. Cooper lives on, a symbol of mystery, rebellion, and the enduring human fascination with the impossible. A man in a suit boarded a plane, hijacked it with quiet confidence, and disappeared into legend, leaving behind only a storm, a parachute, and a story the world will never forget. If you made it this far, thank you for watching. Every view, like, and comment helps these stories reach more people and keeps the memory of those still missing or unsolved alive. If you'd like to help the channel grow, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe, and leave a comment below. Tell me where in the world you're listening from and which story stayed with you most. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and remember, the truth is often stranger than we think. This is Chapman Crime.